the grand opportunity to see his beautiful Negro Leagues Museum in Kansas City a number of years ago. If you haven't gotten a chance to go there, please take the time. It really does a great story. Of course, I'm not a historian, so never trust me on the historical facts, but it really does a great job of telling the story of the Negro players, and especially the ones that were part of the Negro Leagues. And in reading Bob's bio, he's one of these guys that's worked his way up from the bottom up. He worked for the local newspaper for a number of years and volunteered, and this is in his bio, so I'm not messing any of this up, volunteered at the Negro Leagues Museum, and for some reason his marketing skills came into play, and they eventually moved him up to being president of the Negro Leagues Museum. Now, the one name that you don't bring up because he can talk endlessly, and I wrote it down somewhere.
Buck O'Neil.
Help me again.
Buck O'Neil.
Thank you. Sorry, Bob. Is Buck O'Neil. Many people, when I've read about it, give Buck O'Neil credit for getting, and I think I'm right about this, getting the Negro Leagues Museum going. And if you know the Buck O'Neil story, he was, what was it, 2 votes shy of getting voted into the Hall of Fame? 1 vote shy of getting voted into the Hall of Fame, and he did this last year, as everybody knows. Bob was thrilled. I was thrilled to see this, and of course, for the Chicago Cubs fans, I just forgot the guy's name.
Buck O'Neil.
Thank you, Buck O'Neil. Just wait, you guys will be 74 years old. You'll figure it out. So it turns out Buck O'Neil worked for the Chicago Cubs, and there's a guy by the name of Ernie Banks that he recruited. And Bob, I'm taking part of your story. Am I in trouble? Bob would tell you that Ernie really wasn't interested in joining the Cubs. He was actually looking to do, was it a Negro Leagues team that was recruiting him? So, a great story. And I don't want to take any more of Bob's time because he's a great storyteller. So,
That's all right, well, it is absolutely an honor to be with you all. I have enjoyed my 2 days here getting to meet folks, and this was my first introduction to a vintage baseball game. And it was actually fun. That was a shame it was so doggone cold. But you know, I watched it from the car and I enjoyed what I was watching. And I told Bill, I said, well, Bill, couldn't y'all have invited me to Florida instead of Dayton? But Dayton is a wonderful city. I've enjoyed myself so much. Thank you all so much for having me. And you can take that old dude off of you go to the next slide and take him off there. You see enough of him already. But Gary is right. That museum in Kansas City is so very, very special. And I have been so very, very fortunate to spend 30 years now. And it's hard for me to believe that it's been 30 years of involvement with this museum. I did indeed start there as a volunteer way back in 1993. And on this slide, those are 2 of the greatest human beings to ever walk the face of this earth who just happen to be great baseball players. Hall of Famers Monty Irvin, and who Gary just mentioned, the late great Buck O'Neil, one of my best friends, my mentor, and my confidant. And they are standing in what was the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum when it was established in 1990 in a little 1-room office at historic 18th and Vine in Kansas City. And I will never forget, I was working for the daily newspaper in its promotions department. I had drawn the assignment of promoting the museum's first ever traveling exhibition, an exhibition called Discover Greatness. And honestly, y'all, I didn't even know there was a Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, and it was literally about 16 blocks away from the Kansas City shop. And so I figured, well, I better go down, check out this museum, do a little research so I could prepare to do the promotional campaign for this fledgling Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. I pull up outside of the historic Lincoln building where the museum was. And I go up to the 3rd floor. And I remember kind of sheepishly peeping my head in, knocked on the door. The late Don Motley, who was the executive director of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum at that time. I look in, he's in the office, and I say, I'm looking for the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. And he looks up at me and he smiles. He says, son, you're standing in it. And y'all, little did I know that I had literally just walked into what would become my passion. I fell in love with the story, and I fell in love with the amazing athletes who made this story. I was captivated by their spirits. And I consider myself to be a baseball fan. And I quickly realized I didn't know a doggone thing about this sport and its history. And I just wanted to learn as much as I could, and I didn't want to keep it to myself. I became, I guess you could say, engrossed in it. And then I started to meet the players. And again, their spirits were so endearing. Because I think every one of you would agree with me if I said, had they been bitter about things that transpired in their lives as they were trying to play baseball in this country, I think every one of us would have said, you had every right to be bitter. But to a player I ever met, not one of them ever harbored any bitterness or spoke any ill will toward anyone who may have attempted to perpetrate something against them as they were playing baseball in this country. Now I'm falling deeper in love. But it took me a minute to understand why that could be. How could they carry that spirit? Well, you could not convince them that they weren't playing the best baseball that was being played in this country. And everybody else thought that the best baseball was being played in the major leagues. They never believed that. They knew how good they were. They knew how good their league was. And quite frankly, y'all, the major leaguers knew how good they were. So they were never going to be bitter about baseball. Now, did they like the things that transpired as they were traveling this country? No, of course not. But they seemingly never would allow their hearts to be hardened with hate. Yeah, no. Hate, as Buck O'Neil would say, takes you out of here. It will take you right on out of here. I don't know if people really fully understand how much energy it takes to hate another human being. And to hate someone 9 times out of 10, you don't even know them. Now, as he would go on to say, it's much easier to love than it is to hate. And so that is what really kind of got me involved. And here I am now, 30 years later, going from being a volunteer to now trying to lead what I believe is one of the most important cultural institutions in the world for the work that we're doing to save a precious piece of baseball and Americana, which was on the verge of extinction. This story, y'all, was going to die when that last Negro leader left the face of this earth. And I had no idea that this was going to happen. You don't come in. I just wanted to support this organization any way that I could. I never saw it turning into a career, and perhaps one of the most gratifying things I could have done either personally or professionally. Next slide, please. And this is the centerpiece of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. Now, I'm biased. I'll be the first to admit that. But I think it is one of the most amazing displays in any museum anywhere in the world. It is known as the Field of Legends. And as you can see, it is a mock baseball diamond that houses 10 of 12 life-size bronze sculptures of Negro League greats. They represent 10 of the first group of Negro League players to be inducted into the National Baseball Hall of Fame, and they're all cast in position as if they were playing a game. And so when you walk into the museum, you walk into an old ballpark and you peer through the chicken wire backstop onto the Field of Legends. And so what we hoped would happen was that our guests would come in, see that incredible display, and that you instantly get this desire to, oh, I can't wait to get out on the field, walk amongst the statues, take my pictures with the statues. But at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, we segregate you from the field. You see, we wanted our visitors, particularly my student age audience, to at least remotely experience what segregation was like. So in the case of these tremendously talented and courageous athletes, they knew full well that they were good enough to play in the major leagues, so close to it, yet so far from it. So from most vantage points in the museum, you can see the field, but can't get to it. And the only way that you're allowed to take the field at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, you have to earn that right. And you do so by learning their story. And by the time you bear witness to everything that they had to endure just to play baseball in this country, the very last thing that happens is now you can take the field. And in many respects, you're now deemed worthy to walk out on the field, as I like to say, with 10 of the baddest brothers that ever played this game. They were great baseball players, and even the chicken wire backstop is symbolic. It is symbolic of American segregation. You see, during that era, if black fans were allowed in to watch a major league game, we were separated by chicken wire. So black fans would sit either down the left or right field lines. We would be separated from white fans who sat in the rest of the ballpark with a chicken wire barrier. We used that same chicken wire to separate all of our visitors from the centerpiece of our exhibition. Next slide, please. And this passage is one of the first things that you see when you walk into the gallery of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. It is taken from the Roman Catholic Bible, Ecclesiastes, and it simply says, "My son, if you aspire to be a servant of the Lord, prepare yourself for testing, set a straight course and keep to it, and do not be dismayed in the face of adversity." Y'all, that was Negro Leagues baseball in a nutshell. They loved the game of baseball so much that they were willing to endure whatever social adversity confronted them as they traveled the highways and byways of this country. Their passion would not only change our sport, but more importantly, it would change this country for the better. And really, that's what drives this story. We almost de-emphasize the baseball players because for us, it is a given that you're going to come in there and you're going to meet some of the greatest athletes to ever play the game of baseball. But you think about this. Jackie Robinson's breaking of Major League Baseball's 6-decade-long self-imposed color barrier, we make the assertion that it wasn't just a part of the civil rights movement, it was the beginning of the civil rights movement. This is 1947. This is well before those more noted civil rights occurrences. This is before Brown versus the Board of Education. This is before Rosa Parks' refusal to move to the back of the bus. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., as my friend Buck O'Neill would so eloquently say, was a sophomore at Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia, when Jackie signed his contract to play in the Dodgers organization. Our very own Harry S. Truman, President Truman, Independence, Missouri, right up the road from Kansas City. He wouldn't integrate the armed forces until a year after Jackie. So for all intents and purposes, this is what started the ball of social progress rolling in our country. Well, Jackie Robinson is handpicked from the great Kansas City Monarchs to be the chosen one. A lot of people don't realize that it all began in Kansas City. I think they think Jackie just walked out of nowhere and started playing for the Brooklyn Dodgers, but his real rookie season was 1945 in Kansas City. And he spent all of 5 months in Kansas City. And the 5 months he spent in Kansas City, he fell in love with everything that Kansas City is famous for. Barbecue and jazz. Yeah, absolutely. And that's where it all began. Next slide, please. And I'll take you back to 2020. 2020, we were celebrating the 100th anniversary of the birth of the Negro Leagues. And I'm gonna let y'all in on a little secret. I don't know how many of you are familiar with not-for-profit organizations. But if you understand not-for-profit organizations, we will make up an anniversary if we think we can raise some money around it. We'll create an anniversary. But the 100th anniversary of the birth of the Negro Leagues was a legitimate anniversary. We feel that the 100th anniversary is one of the most significant occurrences, again, not in baseball history, but in American history. So we go back into the Paseo YMCA, right around the corner from the museum, which is where the Negro Leagues had been formed on February 13, 1920 by Andrew Root Foster. We go back to the very building that gave birth to this story 100 years from the date that it happened. And as you can see, I've got an all-star delegation of distinguished guests with me. Standing next to me, Major League Baseball Commissioner Rob Manfred, John Sherman, who had just bought the Kansas City Royals, my dear friend, owner of the Kansas City Royals. Standing behind him, Xavier James, Chief Operating Officer of Major League Baseball's Players Association. Next to him, in front of him, the incredible Judy Pace Flood, the widow of the late, great Kurt Flood, who again, as we were discussing earlier today, should absolutely be in the National Baseball Hall of Fame. Absolutely, for sure. And over to the other side, that is Quentin Lucas, the Honorable Quentin Lucas, the mayor of the great city of Kansas City. Standing behind him, my dear friend, 8-time Gold Glove winner, Kansas City Royal Hall of Famer, and now Jackson County Executive, the legendary Frank White, former State Senator Kiki Curls. Behind her, Mike Kehoe, the Lieutenant Governor of the state of Missouri. Stuart Myers was our board chair, and on the very far end is Jermaine Reed, 3rd District City Council. The museum operates in the 3rd District. So I've got an all-star roster of distinguished guests. Major League Baseball and the Players Association announced a joint $1 million contribution to the museum to jumpstart this 100th anniversary celebration. And anyone who knows me knows that anytime a check is involved, I'm happy. I'm happy. And I was very happy that day. But I was even more excited, y'all, about the announcement we made right after that. And that for the first time, all 30 Major League teams were going to honor the Negro Leagues on one single day. They were going to wear our 100th anniversary patch on the uniforms. They were going to participate in stadium with a tip your cap event with fans and players. And this was going to be a major level of recognition. And of course, we had a litany of events to celebrate the 100th anniversary. And it was going to jumpstart a major fundraising campaign. So we're off to a flying start. And then less than 30 days later, all heck broke loose. A doggone coronavirus. Y'all, I still don't know what a coronavirus is. All I know is it wreaked havoc. And we shuttered our doors on March 14th of 2020. Right after the Big 12 tournament was in town, and they made the decision to cancel the tournament, I took their lead. I closed the museum the very next day. We were shuttered until June 16th of 2020, for about 3 months. The National Day of Recognition was supposed to take place on June 26th of 2020. Well, it was very apparent that this National Day of Recognition wasn't going to happen on June 26th, because at that time, Major League Baseball and the Players Association were in very contentious negotiations, not on when they were going to bring the game back, but if they were going to bring the game back. And I tell people this all the time, and I mean it sincerely. As a steward of this story, you know that you are not allowed to wallow in self-pity. That would be doing a complete disservice to all of those athletes who call the Negro Leagues home. After all, these players never cried about the social injustice. They went out and did something about it. You won't let me play with you in the major leagues? Okay, I'll create my own league. And when you stop to think about that, that is the American way. So while America herself was trying to prevent them from sharing in the joys of her so-called national pastime, it was the American spirit that allowed them to persevere and prevail. So you know that you are not allowed to wallow in self-pity. But y'all, I'll be lying to you if I told you I wasn't doing some wallowing. Oh, no. There was some wallowing going on because we were watching all of these plans that we had so diligently put together, and the future of this museum was riding on those plans, and you're watching it all fall by the wayside, and you're fighting an opponent that you can't even see. You don't know how to fight against it. And I use a terrible baseball analogy to describe coronavirus. But I think you baseball folks would kind of relate to this. Coronavirus was that big, nasty right-hander who had just thrown one high and tight and knocked you down. So you know you got to get back up. You got to dust yourself off, and you got to get back in the batter's box and try to see how you gonna hit this sucker. And that's what we had to do. And so out of an act of desperation, I came up with an idea, and I called my good friend, the great writer, Joe Posnanski. And I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with Joe's work. He's the author of the Baseball 100, which is incredible. But I don't know if he'll ever write a book better than The Soul of Baseball, a road trip through Buck O'Neill's America. If you haven't, you absolutely need to pick it up. It should be required reading for every high school student in this country. And so Joe, as I like to say, is my brother from another mother. And we're as close as brothers, even though we're not biologically related. And every time, y'all, I have a bad idea, I vet it with Joe. And so I called Joe, I said, Joe, what do you think about an idea to see if we can't do a virtual tip your cap to the Negro League, since this in-stadium event wasn't going to take place? Maybe we could get a few athletes, a few dignitaries, fans to take a picture of themselves, post it on a website that we would create. And I'm waiting for him to tell me, Bob, that's a terrible idea. We don't have enough time to do this idea. And he didn't say that. He thought it was a great idea. And then he reached out to his business partner, a guy named Dan McGinn, a tremendous communication strategist out of the DC area. Dan thought it was a great idea. And the three of us went to work, y'all, in about a week's time. Next slide, please. We rolled out this campaign called Tip Your Cap to the Negro Leagues, and we rolled it out with 4 U.S. presidents tipping their cap. President Obama, President George W. Bush, former President Bill Clinton, former President Jimmy Carter, transcending groundbreaking athletes like Michael Jordan, Billie Jean King, Magic Johnson, my all-time favorite player, Henry Aaron, Willie Mays, the list goes on and on, Stephen Colbert, Conan O'Brien, the Temptations. I mean, this thing just took off. And then, y'all, when we literally went into outer space and got a tip of the cap from astronaut Chris Cassidy, who was aboard the International Space Station, I knew then that we had done something pretty doggone special. And all of a sudden, this feeling of doom and gloom that had consumed me turned to renewed hope and optimism. That's the resiliency that we draw from this incredible story. And all of a sudden, our fortunes just started to change. And we came through 2020 in the midst of one of the most turbulent times in American history. We had one of the best years we've ever had. And we have been riding that wave of momentum ever since. Next slide, please. And this takes me to December 5th of 2021, when we were waiting at the museum to see if my friend Buck O'Neil would finally get voted into the National Baseball Hall of Fame. And I told my staff that if he gets in, I would lead a champagne toast. Now, I don't drink. I don't drink alcohol at all. But I told him if he gets in, I will lead a champagne toast. And when the verdict arrived, and this time, because Gary mentioned the fact that he missed by 1 vote in 2006, the same year that he would ultimately pass away, this time the verdict went our way. And I fulfilled my word, and let me tell y'all, that was one of the sweetest glasses of champagne I have ever had, because my friend now was about to take his place, his rightful place amongst the immortals of this game. And while I was certainly, it was bittersweet when we got to last year and he's not there with us physically, his spirit was certainly there. And it doesn't diminish the magnitude of the accomplishment. Next slide, please. A little bit of Negro Leagues history. This is Andrew Rube Foster, the genius. It would be Rube Foster who would establish the Negro Leagues in a meeting held in Kansas City on February 13, 1920. Rube Foster, y'all, in my estimation, is the greatest baseball mind this sport has ever seen. That virtually no one knows who the heck he is. He is that rare baseball entity who would have checked the box as a manager, in terms of going in the Hall of Fame, as a player, as a manager, and as an executive. And you don't find many who check all 3 boxes. He had been a great player himself in the early era of black baseball. As a matter of fact, he is credited with having invented what we now know to be the screwball. Back then it was called a fadeaway. And he perfected that pitch. So much so that the great Major League manager, John McGraw, would sneak Rube into his camp so that Rube Foster could teach Christy Mathewson how to throw the screwball. Christy Mathewson threw the pitch all the way into the National Baseball Hall of Fame that he learned from Rube Foster. But he was best known as this visionary, this tremendous leader. He would organize the Negro Leagues, he would become president of the Negro Leagues, he owned the Chicago American Giants, and he managed the Chicago American Giants. And y'all, as a manager, Foster was so savvy that he was known to fine his ball players at the turn of the 1900s as much as $5 if you were tagged out standing up. You were supposed to slide. Yeah, Rube would draw a circle down the first base line and a circle down the third base line. And if every one of his players couldn't drop a bunt inside that circle, he would fine them. You see, he was adamant about the style of play that would become signature to a Negro Leagues baseball. Fast, aggressive, daring. They would bunt their way on. They steal second. They steal third. And man, if you weren't too smart, they were stealing home. And that was the style of play that drew both black and white fans who sat side by side during an era when doing something socially together was virtually unheard of. Negro Leagues baseball brought the two races together. You see, that's the irony of this great story. Here's a league born out of segregation that would become the driving force for social change in this country. Again, at Major League games, separated by chicken wire. At Negro League games, we sat side by side watching what many would say the best baseball being played in this country, and without question, the most entertaining brand of baseball that was being played in this country. And you can best believe for $5, they were sliding into those bases. You see, $5 at the turn of the 1900s was a lot of money. My good friend Buck O'Neill says that when he joined the Kansas City Monarchs in 1938, he was making $100 a month salary and $1 a day meal money. And naturally, my kids would come to the museum, they hear $1, they wondering, what in the world could you buy for $1? Well, 38, we're still in the midst of the Great Depression. Buck stayed at a hotel in Kansas City, right down where the museum operates, used to be there, called the Street Hotel. It was a black-owned hotel right on the corner of 18th and Vine there. And he says, Bob, I could walk downstairs, I could have ham and eggs and a cup of coffee for breakfast. Said he would skip lunch, only ate 2 meals a day, could have a Kansas City strip steak dinner with all the fixings plus dessert. At that time he smoked, could buy a package of Camel cigarettes, could walk across the street to the gym theater and see the matinee, and still have 15 cents to play with out of that dollar. So for $5, they're sliding into those bases. Next slide, please. That is James Leslie Wilkinson, J.L. Wilkinson, or Wilkie as he was affectionately known. He is the only white owner of the original 8 Negro League franchises. He owned the Kansas City Monarchs. Yeah, initially Rube Foster did not want any white ownership, but he kept hearing these great things about this dude named James Leslie Wilkinson. Buck O'Neill would say of Wilkie that he was the first white man he ever met without any prejudice. So when there weren't enough hotel rooms to go around, they slept in the same bed together. Yeah, his players absolutely adored him because he treated them with great respect. And they played their hearts out for him. And he built one of the greatest baseball franchises, not in black baseball history, but in baseball history. Kansas City Monarchs, y'all, had 1 losing season in their almost 40-year existence in the Negro Leagues, and that was during World War II when so many of their stars were going off to serve. They sent more players to the Major Leagues than any other Negro League franchise. They were a model baseball franchise. There are those who will say that they were the New York Yankees of the Negro Leagues. There are others who will say that the New York Yankees were the Kansas City Monarchs of Major League Baseball. They were that good. And it was all steered by, as I like to describe him, a diminutive white man from Algona, Iowa, who will become one of the largest figures in black baseball history. You can't make this stuff up. Next slide, please. And please keep me on time. I started running my mouth. I know I only had, they don't told me I had about 30 minutes.
Denny McClain went an hour last year. And he decided when he went shot.
I don't know. And of course, our folks who come in, they are surprised by these game-changing advents of black baseball. Shin guard, batting helmet, all originated in the Negro Leagues. And the most significant of them all, night baseball. Night baseball, they were playing night games 5 years before they played a night game in the Major Leagues. They were playing them in the Negro Leagues. And again, our history book is going to tell us that the first professional night baseball game, 1935, Crossley Field there in Cincinnati, Ohio, Cincinnati Reds versus Philadelphia Phillies. Well, the history book is wrong. The first professional night baseball game, 1930, and it featured our very own Kansas City Monarchs. J.L. Wilkinson literally mortgaged everything he had to pioneer night baseball. Portable, generated light towers. So not only could they play a night game in Kansas City, they could load them up on the truck and play a night game virtually anywhere. Truth of the matter is, by the time they played that game in Cincinnati, the Monarchs and a team called the House of David. I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with the House of David. The House of David, Bill had taken night baseball all the way out to your neck of the woods to Seattle. And Wilkie wasn't doing this to be innovative. He was doing it for some money. You see, back then, the Negro Leagues were primarily relegated to playing on Sundays. Major League Baseball really didn't play on Sundays, so the Negro Leagues would rent the ballpark, play that Sunday doubleheader. Black folks left church, going straight to the ballpark, dressed to the nines, as they would say. And so he was looking for a way to get the working class fan into the ballpark. Night baseball became the answer. Night baseball became bigger than Sunday games. And Sunday games were so popular that black churches would move their service time up and out. Now, if you know anything about the black church, you don't mess with service time. No. 11 o'clock Sunday go to meeting. Well, when the Monarchs were home, service started at 10 o'clock. And everybody filed out going to that Sunday doubleheader. Night baseball was even bigger than that. But you guys, you see, here's where the fallacy occurs. American historians never viewed Negro Leagues baseball as having been professional. Thus, the major league could get credited with something that had happened 5 years before. And as I share with my young audience, it is absolutely akin to Columbus discovering a country that already had people there. You can't do it. No, you can't do it. But the moral of the story is this. If you don't control the pen, you don't control the story. Thus, your story is never written with the kind of accuracy or relevancy that it should be. That great museum there at Historic 18th and Vine in Kansas City is about taking control of the pen and finally telling the story the way it should have been told. Next slide, please. The great Josh Gibson. Many would call him the Black Babe Ruth, but there are others who saw Gibson swing that big bat of his who would call Ruth the white Josh Gibson. Gibson was incredible. The great power hitting catcher in 1936 hit 84 home runs in 170 games against all levels of competition, including major leaguers. He had strings of 75, 71, and 69 in single seasons. He is still believed to be the only man to ever hit a ball completely out of Old Yankee Stadium. He hit one in the Polo Grounds in New York that they estimated to travel over 600 feet. But he wasn't just a great power hitter. Josh was a great hitter with power. Lifetime batting average of 354. And in head-to-head competition against major leaguers in countless exhibition games, hit over 420. And what makes it even more remarkable as fans of this game, he was doing it as a catcher. Catchers don't do that. No, you get one or the other, power or average, but it is rare that you get the combination of the two, particularly for any sustained period of time, because the positions are so physically demanding. It beats your body up. Josh Gibson wasn't a good catcher. He was a great catcher. Rifle arm. He is throwing guys out from the crouch back in that era. Had complete control of his pitching staff. As Buck would say, he called a great game and was a good running catcher. Gonna steal you 20, 25 bases or more to go with that big bat. And as you can see in that picture, when I say big bat, I mean big bat. That's 40 ounce, 41 inches. And as you can see, he's not choking up. No. He's got it gripped down below the knob. Big, massive hands. Trademark rolled up left sleeve showing off those goods. Big, powerful forearms. Big, powerful thighs. And great eyes. Buck O'Neil again would describe him in this fashion. That he had the eyes of Ted Williams and the power of Babe Ruth rolled into one dynamic package. His outs, as we say in the game, were loud outs. Yeah, the third baseman and the shortstop, they were damn near in left field when Gibson came up. So, Bill, I guess that was the Negro League's version of a shift, because you were not going to creep in on Josh Gibson, because you might get killed. Next slide, please. The great Monte de Higo, he hailed from Cuba. His nickname was El Maestro, the master, because he could do it all. Played all 9 positions, played all 9 of them well. He is the only baseball player in the history of our sport to be enshrined into 5 different countries' baseball halls of fame. He's in the Mexican, Cuban, Venezuelan, Dominican, and in Cooperstown. How in the world could we not know about a player of this magnitude? But that is the plight of the Negro Leagues. Yeah, that is why that museum is so vitally important to help us know what we don't know. Or as my mother would say, you don't know what you don't know. And this man, one year in the Mexican League, he wins the pitching title. He goes 19-2 with an 0.90 ERA. Oh, it gets better. The sucker hits .387 and won the batting title the same year. That makes no sense. Next slide, please. And of course, the legendary James Thomas Cool Papa Bell. First and foremost, the greatest nickname in baseball history, bar none. Cool Papa, y'all, is still believed to be the fastest man to ever play this game. They clocked him circling the bases from home to home in an amazing 12 seconds. Some of you may have heard his good friend Satchel Paige would say of Cool that he was so fast, he could walk in a room, turn off the light, get in bed, pull up the covers before the room went dark. That is actually a true story, but I tell my guests all the time, you do not have to fictionalize the speed of Cool Papa Bell. Cool Papa Bell once stole 175 bases in a less than 200 game season. He twice, honest to God's truth, twice scored from first base on a bunt in exhibition games against Major League All-Stars. See, plays like the bunt and run, hit and run, really created and perfected in the Negro Leagues later picked up by Major League Baseball. Buck O'Neil says they were playing in Mexico, and Cool goes from first to third so fast on a single that the Mexican team stopped the game in protest. Because they swore he had cut across the diamond, that no man could get around the bases that fast. How fast was Cool Papa Bell? The state of Ohio's own Jesse Owens would never race Cool Papa Bell. Flat out refused to race Cool Papa Bell. Jesse Owens would race horses around the bases, but never Cool Papa Bell. Next slide, please. And of course, we could have spent the entire evening talking about this dude. That is the legendary Leroy Satchel Paige, arguably the greatest pitcher this sport has ever seen. We know for certain the oldest rookie in the history of Major League Baseball. Now, y'all, Major League Baseball says that Satchel was 42 years old when he finally got his opportunity to pitch in the Major Leagues with the Cleveland Indians in 1948. Some of you may recall that Cleveland in 1948 would win the World Series. My Cleveland fans get tired of hearing me say this. It was the last time Cleveland won the World Series. It was 1948, led by the great Larry Doby and Satchel Paige. Now, many thought Satchel should have been named Rookie of the Year. He gets called up July 7th of 1948 on what we believe was his birthday. We don't know for sure. And the old man goes 6-1 with a 2.4 ERA his rookie season at age 42, which means he was likely closer to 52. He never told his real age, and y'all, I don't think Satchel knew his real age. And that is not far-fetched, because there were a lot of folks, particularly black folks in the Deep South, who did not know how old they were. Baseball says he was born July 7, 1906, which I absolutely do not believe. The man that died in Kansas City in 1982, he had seen 76 a long time ago. No, Satchel was likely closer, most says he was at least 10 years older than what he claimed to be. Satchel Paige was likely born into the early to mid-1890s in Mobile, Alabama. And like virtually everyone of that era, you're not born in a hospital. You're born at home to a midwife. And so that birth record was kept where? Absolutely. In the Bible. Back page of the family Bible. Now, according to Satchel, the goat ate that page out of the Bible. So he didn't know. And as Satchel would whimsically pose the question, y'all, how old would you be if you didn't know how old you are? Or that age is simply mind over matter. If you don't mind, it don't matter. And that is how he led his life. Now, in his prime, they clocked his fastball at 105 miles per hour. But what really made Satchel so special, and as you baseball folks know, 105 is pretty doggone special. But what really made Satchel so special was 105 with pinpoint control. He could put it exactly where he wanted to put it, and I'm not talking about just throwing strikes. The catcher set the target, he hit the target. He didn't miss. He didn't warm up in the bullpen like most pitchers do, throwing to the catcher across home plate. You know what Satchel would use? A stick of foil chewing gum wrapper. Honest to God's truth. The catcher would sit the chewing gum wrapper on top of home plate. And wherever the catcher moved the chewing gum wrapper, Satchel right over the top of that chewing gum wrapper. He was uncanny. I tell my guests all the time, there will never, ever, ever be another Leroy Satchel Paige. Not someone who combines the longevity. By his estimation, he pitched in over 2,600 games. The great stuff. Recorded some 55 no-hitters and only God knows how many strikeouts. And the charisma. He could sell it. Yeah, he could sell it, but he could back it up. You see, Satchel was essentially the Muhammad Ali of baseball before we ever knew who Muhammad Ali was. But he could absolutely back it up, and many of you may know this, but he had names for his pitches. So he didn't have fastball, curveball, changeup. And no, not Satchel. Satchel had what he called his midnight creeper. He had the two-humper. He had the back dodger. He had the hesitation pitch. He had the long tom, the short tom, the jump ball, the trouble ball, the radio ball, the wobbly ball, the dipsy-do. And he also had a pitch that he famously called his B-ball. You know why he called it the B-ball? Because Satchel says, it be's where I want it to be when I want it to be there. And I tell all my young major league pitchers, when they come and visit the Negro Leagues Museum, they need to get over there and rub elbows with the life-size statue of Satchel, and they need to develop themselves a B-ball. Next slide, please. And of course, I talked a little bit about Jackie Robinson, and there he is as a member of the great Kansas City Monarchs. 1945. At the end of the 45 season, he had literally disappeared. His teammates, and I was blessed to know several of his former teammates, they had no idea where he was. Well, as we know, he was meeting with Branch Rickey, and the two of them would make that monumental decision that he would be the chosen one, the man to break Major League Baseball's 6-decade-long self-imposed color barrier. Jackie was not Branch Rickey's first choice, contrary to popular belief. His first choice was my dear friend, the late great Monty Irvin. That is who Branch Rickey really wanted. And to be quite frank, Monty Irvin was a much better baseball player than Jackie Robinson, and that is not taking anything away from Jackie Robinson. Jackie Robinson is one of the greatest athletes in American sports history. Baseball, y'all, was his weakest sport. Much better basketball, football, track athlete than was baseball player, and some say an even better tennis player. There was nothing that Jackie couldn't do. But there were others in the Negro Leagues who were better baseball players than Jackie Robinson, and Monty Irvin was a superstar in the Negro Leagues. He had the same pedigree that Jackie had. 5'2" guy, movie star, good looks. He had superstardom written all over him. But Monty had just gotten back from World War II. And admittedly, he was suffering from what he called shell shock. Today, we call it post-traumatic syndrome. But the real reason that Monty Irvin wasn't the first was because of the Newark Eagles owner. He played for the Newark Eagles. The Newark Eagles owner was a woman by the name of Effa Manley. So yes, ladies, there were women who were running and owning Negro League teams well before Major League Baseball. Effa Manley was one of several. Olivia Taylor, Hilda Bolden, Minnie Forbes, and of course Effa Manley, who is known as the queen of the Negro Leagues. And so to say that she couldn't stand Branch Rickey might be an understatement. She didn't care for Branch Rickey. And honestly, y'all, for good reason. Because she saw exactly what Branch Rickey was going to do. Branch Rickey was going to come into the Negro Leagues and essentially raid it of his star talent without any compensation to his owners. And she was prepared to fight. She threatened to litigate. And Rickey knew that he could not have this public battle about this black ball player with this black woman, although it is controversial on what Effa Manley's ethnicity really was. Some say that she was biracial. Others believe that she was the byproduct of an affair that her white mother had with a white man, that she was actually white. But nevertheless, she was so fair-skinned that she could have passed for white. And yet she had chose to assimilate to black culture at a time when it wasn't popular being black. Yet she was also wily enough to use her whiteness when it would allow her to shop in places that other folks couldn't and stay in places that other folks couldn't. She is an interesting character study in her own right. But anyway, Rickey knew he couldn't have this fight. And so he backs off of Monty Irvin. That's when he turns his sight to Kansas City and Jackie Robinson. But here's how shrewd Rickey was. And Rickey has been hailed as a saint. And I certainly believe that he had some righteousness about him, because this was a bold move to go try and basically buck the owners and try and bring a black man into Major League Baseball. But y'all, Rickey is somewhere between a saint and a devil. But then again, aren't we all? And so what Rickey knew was that J.O. Wilkinson couldn't fight back. You know why? If you remember from the slide, he was white. Yeah, J.O. Wilkinson was a white man who made his entire living in black baseball. He can't be the public face of blocking what every black person in America had been waiting on for a black man to play in the major leagues. If he does, it is a wrap. That black fan base that had been so loyal to him, they would have turned their backs on him right away. And Rickey knew this. Rickey never paid J.O. Wilkinson, as my late mother would say, not one red cent for a man who was under contract. He took Jackie Robinson away from the Kansas City Monarchs. And publicly, Wilkie said all the right things because he's got to protect his business interests. Privately, he is seething. And he's not seething because a black man is about to play in the major leagues, but this black man you're going to take away from me, you're going to put me out of business. He sells his interest in the Monarchs in 1948, the year after Jackie takes the field, because the handwriting is on the wall. It ain't a matter of if, it was a matter of when the Negro Leagues were going to fold. And this story gets even better. His business partner was a guy named T.Y. Baird. T.Y. Baird, y'all, was a known card-carrying Kansas City, Kansas Ku Klux Klansman who made his living in black baseball. You can't make this stuff up. Somebody's going to do this story. We're going to get a TV series out of this somehow or another, and I sure hope they make old Bob the executive producer. Next slide, please. And some of you may have known this, that there were 3 women to play professionally in the Negro Leagues. Tony Stone, Connie Morgan, and Mamie Peanut Johnson, pioneers, women who competed with and against the men in the 1950s in the Negro Leagues. Tony Stone was the first female of professional baseball. She was followed by Mamie Peanut Johnson and Connie Morgan. Mamie Peanut Johnson, who was a 5'3" pitcher with a strong right arm. Connie Morgan hailed from Philadelphia. Mamie was the only one of the women who wanted to play in the All-American Girls Professional League. And of course, as you know, that was the inspiration for the hit film A League of Their Own. Well, she was denied because of the color of her skin. They were not accepting black women in that league either. And if you ever saw A League of Their Own, you might recall there's one scene where you remember the ball gets loose and the sister picks it up and she fires it back in and everybody's looking in complete astonishment. Well, that was the late, great Penny Marshall who directed the film. That was her ode to Mamie Peanut Johnson. And then Connie Morgan, as I mentioned, hailed from Philadelphia. Tony Stone would take the roster plays, next slide please, of this dude, the legendary Henry Aaron. Henry Aaron begins his career in the Negro Leagues in 1952 with the Indianapolis Clowns. At that time, he was a skinny, cross-handed hitting shortstop. So in the case of Mr. Aaron, he was a right-hand hitter who hit with his left hand on top. That is unorthodox. The fear is that you break your wrist hitting in that manner. Henry Aaron, y'all, is knocking the cover off the baseball in a highly unorthodox fashion. When it gets to the Clowns, they put the right hand on top, and the rest, as they say, is history. He was shortly after discovered by the Boston Braves, who would become the Milwaukee Braves, who of course would become the Atlanta Braves. Henry Aaron will go down in this sport as one of his all-time greatest players. He is my all-time favorite player and my childhood idol, and I had the great honor of walking my childhood idol through the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in 1999, and let me tell y'all, it was the first and only time I've ever been starstruck. Y'all, I was like a kid because every time I was around him, I was reduced to that almost 12-year-old kid when he hit home run 715 in Atlanta's Fulton County Stadium. I'm at home in my mother's living room in little bitty Crawfordville, Georgia, 80 miles away. And as my childhood idol was circling the bases in Atlanta's Fulton County Stadium, I'm circling the bases in my mother's living room. So her old couch was first base. She had her own TV that was second base. The other old couch was third base, and her recliner was home plate. And as my childhood idol was touching them all, I'm touching them all. And here I am face to face with him. We get to this photograph. It's my favorite photograph in the entire exhibition. And as you can see, there's a small cardboard duffel bag right by his foot. And he looks at me and he tells me, Bob, I may have had 2 changes of clothes in that bag, $1.50 in my pocket, and a ham sandwich that my mama had made me, going to go chase that dream. It worked out pretty doggone well for the ham. And for me, it is one of those validating points inside the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, because most of our visitors had no idea that the legendary Henry Aaron had played in the Negro Leagues. And if I told you that a skinny cross-handed kid from Mobile, Alabama, black kid from Mobile, Alabama with great Babe Ruth record no one would have ever believed. He's just a sampling of the talent that was there in the Negro Leagues. And he told me, he said, Bob, I didn't know if I was leaving home to go play with kids my own age or grown men. And as we know, he was playing with grown men. Next slide, please. And of course, this gets me to my friend Buck O'Neil. We talked a little bit about him, and people oftentimes ask me what I remember most about Buck. And there's so many things. I've been so blessed. They paid me, y'all, to hang out with Buck O'Neil. I would have done it for nothing. Yeah, and all of the car rides and plane rides, breakfast, lunch, dinner, we golfed together. All the stories that he shared with me. And I tell people, and I mean it sincerely, the smartest thing that I ever did was I kept my mouth closed and I listened. Because there was a lot of wisdom that he would impart if you wanted it. He didn't force it on you. And there's not a single day that passes by, as you well imagine, that I don't think about my friend Buck O'Neil. And I talk to Buck almost every single day. Now, he didn't always talk back to me, but I talk to him almost every day. But the thing that I remember most about Buck O'Neil, and I think this so much exemplifies who he was and his spirit, is that you always felt better leaving Buck than you did when you came to see him. There was a certain innateness about this man. He had the same qualities that we saw in Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Mother Teresa, Gandhi. The ability to see the good in everyone. Sometimes, y'all, when they weren't good, he saw the good in them. And he just so beautifully and vividly demonstrated to all of us that you could indeed get further with love than you could with hate. And I witnessed this every single place that we went. If he didn't know you, he wanted to know you. Yeah, the man never met a stranger in his life. He would go over and introduce himself. My name is Buck O'Neil, what's yours? And by the time we would be leaving to go to our respective flights or wherever it was, they were sharing an embrace as if they had known each other all their lives. And it is such an honor for me now to walk in his enormous shoes. You can't feel them. I would be naive to think that I could step into his footsteps and feel those enormous shoes. And there would be a lot of people in my position who would cave in to the weight of his shadow looming over them. But for me, his shadow protects me. Yeah, he's guiding my feet, my footsteps. And for me now to have taken the baton and picked up where he left off, guiding this great museum, continuing to grow it and hopefully positioning it for long-term sustainability so that our young people can have an opportunity to learn something that none of us were privy to during our own formal educations, but not only learn it for its tremendously educational value, but perhaps even more, y'all, its inspirational value. Because for me, if our children walk away from their experience at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum knowing nothing other than this, what the Negro Leagues teaches us is very simple. In this great country of ours, if you dare to dream and you believe in yourself, you can do or be anything you want to be. You see, folks, they dared to dream of playing baseball. They had no idea that they were making history. They didn't care about making history. They just wanted to play ball. But the pride, the passion, the perseverance, the determination, the courage that they demonstrated in the face of adversity. Our story is not about the adversity, but rather what they did to overcome the adversity. And that's the real story. And folks, it is indeed a story that transcends race, it transcends age, and it transcends gender. And that is our story. So again, on behalf of our team at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, I am delighted that we were finally able to get me scheduled to come out here. I have enjoyed myself immensely. Don't be surprised if you see me down in Florida next year when y'all doing your thing down in Florida. Number one, there's gonna be a whole lot of women down there.
Will you play?
And I might even play. Yeah, I might even play. So thank you all so much for having me.